Amadeus is light back, so I can feel better.
What?
I said Amadeus is light back, so
Okay, sounds good.
Alright, ready?
Yeah.
Bio-oriental frames Asianness as who likely to judge biologically pathologize the position of the Asian bodies and how through civil society that speaks your minute of this is the Western pen and fantasy and catalyst with the yellow seltzer 21. Your life logical on age, live ontology, different theories, and work only one episode, similar James, your armature, reproductive, future, Asian data, but they are to better phrase, but capacity for you, more within your life, sort of single lower, yellow, 16, complex, of ice, and the end of lower fear of the reproductive future, shot of birth, or into the origin, yellow, premier, preservation, recast, rush, loss, shot, rush, decausation, to channel, for power, to deconstruct, says by origin, potential for amazing yellow life, is something is for to change the Asian ontology of life in space, as bounded body, singular, irreducible, poses of one's self property, occasionally other trinity, that they can be writers, and property, owner, right, racial formation, lucid, message, reality, individual fear, violation, magic, seeks to restore, or to jeopardize, we see limited combo that his body's property, and biological, biological disease, metaphor, that biological perceivable as multiform across time and spatial causes seeks to recognize nature, mechanical, non-mechanical, but likely are in their own right hand. Yellow life filling over property, imagine life, and Asian compares to likely genetic refuses property, imagine life, and totally institution, other communication, explosive, growth, that is the West, the overspilling, monsters, flood of life, her flood of yellow life, penetration of the horror of the masculine individual, solution, imagines a little genocide of the Chinese people, the microscope, that a master of warfare to extinguish yellow microscopic life, severe imagine life itself, refuse categorization of life within the bounded white after the genocide, humanly by China, chastisement of China, yellow life, the uprising, which a national subject, we consolidate and very possibility white differences on the eradication of the new Asian lives in a new era of the yellow prayer where our bodies stay flying from an oriental invasion. There's supposedly two Asian neighbors in favor of a new white utopia. Reorganizes race territoriality to lock in the Asian as a perpetual foreigner. Outlet 7. Competitive Asian American education approaching Oriental invasion, whatever Asians on two walls in terms of historically exclusion and law perpetual foreigner central will be that second tradition. German Irish should not be neglected by the Guernsey graffiti, stop the Asian or to Berkeley City. There that keep getting well appropriate Asians while whites will become affirmative action government policy change and intentionally discriminating Asian American new white flight white prince also Valley opting up at public high schools and alarming to kids are two Asian white Paul's overly stressed students not academic competition Asian Americans who don't does his marriage and parents team that type myth is uglier than the rest of white plurality model minority event the way teens whiteness as he put above all possible social life by holding the Asian American as a model that can also surpass the white life that causes immense psychic loss while pushing oppression of other minority groups under the Harlem 13. MMS secures the parity perpetual locking African American Latinos even after large plan had downstream from Asian Americans to degrees generating anger resentment racial triangulation Asian audible white divine and conquering tactic reducing chance of coalition forming unequal societal structure. MMS isn't true for millions of Americans promotes meritocratic logic assumption that Asians achieve success by their own effort increase pressure Asian American they lack significant cohesion get a message work hard and complain last MMS is part of American exceptionalism but these some Asian Americans themselves promote their stereotype unknown contribute to demonization of other communities produces reinforcement and prohibition once that emotion are difficult to counter argue furthermore the body of the Asian American fixing symptomology on the psyche is lived within the reflection of the mirror to the reflection of the social and has no place in the conspiracies. The Asian is not a jubilant narcissist but a fresher subject within a constant antagonist between the social mirrors that appropriate their egos Asian and the unconscious that lies prohibited seeking escape into something new the image that they desire to affirm power but the power lies within the wall of violence that they cannot claim to angle one eye finest unity the image of the other the ego only comes from the outside if it forwardly it's going to be your personal desire to become more of a reflection of the ego bodily visual the smooth mapping bodily and visual magical into the bodily ego the ego gives us almost seen as current identity aggressively towards the extraction of the enchantment that horrifies misplaced for the unified image of the self from the inception of the ego the oriental fictional depiction is successful allowing a bodily ego and magical across the symbol of their writing ratification and image metaphorical mirrors in which the individual dual identification is impossible successful fabrication is unity laws unpleasant devalued identification the subject experiences them as external opposition leads to a sense of psychic dislocation forever in combat with his own image structures the desire to maintain psychic distance the virtual impossibility for Asian Americans to control the ways in which they are apprehended this spirit image provides little narcissistic gratification and improves the toxic representation which the boys refuse to identify the standard this strategizing resistance against racialized bodies thus the plan justice requires open border for human migration we define open border as a melancholy politics to open up the borders of subjectivity human migrants are the humans who migrate out of the boundaries of repressive hegemonic fantasies of the immigrant subjectivity this pathological project affects the crossing of borders of affects where the human migrant returns back on its lost subjects memories and experiences that haunts them till this day and act not a prescription but a description a recognition of transnational metaphysics and no longer signifies representation but expresses only that of changing assemblages this is the condition of openness that defines a colonial fantasy in favor of an assumption that generates new possibilities of belonging and becoming A&T. Melancholy removes the Asian American psychic, Asian American from a victim responsible psychic melodies, art, reparation, reinstatement, communal level, melancholy structure, every life mechanism, reconstructs identity, renewing lost communities, reinstatement, loss of lost and loved object in a world that will have them encompass productive melancholy, ego willing to preserve even under the self, communal law possible, the mental preservation of the object, love and safe extinction, ethical hold of the melancholy ego border has no such ethic, perfectly content to kill the lost object, psychic pedagogy of surviving in history of whiteness as property, the collective rather than individual loss. We also mourn as a whole experiencing lost parts, the military refusal of the ego to let go of the heart of melancholy and productive political potential, militantissimo, mourning to engagement belongs that the humanities during the clinic. This project exists in a creative play racial melancholy and offering a number of new critical interventions to understand better our students, our patients, our wider communities, ourselves, and others exercise in models of collective interpretation and political creativity until then the everyday racial melancholy by Asian Americans. It is the naming of this analysis that transforms difference into a politicized identity. Lose 17. The Rep firm essentialist rep doubly contested identity constituted of different convergences of the assumptions that of racial essence emerges at the textual model, the psychical differential territory arrangement of claim regarding justice and subjectivity rather than demographic doubly established from within geopolitical position charted out by trans-Pacific relations since World War II and ideal subject exemplified post-racial futurity in yellow time doubly operates in a transnational political force and demarcates boundaries of racial territory minorities and significant integrated part of the subject detours from hegemonic path and determined by master immigrant narrative that defines the doubly knowledge production of new modes of belonging in John 2K12 complex and moving continue to influence the experience and spectrum of belonging not belonging no totalizing force can ultimately reverse the truth and realities the state of being a epistemological gift and unexpected one the future of doubly theology located in the future of the negotiated diverse and multiple points of reference different notes may seem not harmonious counterproductive but post necessitating critique that envision the decolonial world post-colonial critique interrogates the limits and boundaries of not only what we're given to what we're to be given and given what we're sanctioned to imagine and erected by the past means to cross over moving from one domain to the other testing and challenging limits and mixing and intermingling of heterogeneous cutting across expectation providing unforeseen pleasures discoveries and experiences assumes a radical critique of the metaphysical logic of the West both ontological and epistemological.
Good for notes?
Yep.
Cool. Let's begin. What does the app do to sort of alleviate anti-Asian bias?
We take on a type of politics called melancholy politics. That is our advocacy statement.
What is melancholy politics?
We believe that Asians, for example, and immigrants, within the process of immigrating into places like America or in another territory, experience a sense of dislocation from their homeland because they have been severed from that very territory in and of itself. We believe that the concept of melancholy itself defines that sort of condition where
Okay,
Asian Americans have lost a particular object.
is
We
the
believe
app-
that bringing back those objects into the world
Okay, what are
temporarily
these
is
sort of
something that is
objects?
not good.
What are these objects?
Those objects can be like a lot of different types of objects. For example, it might be the home at which they stayed. It might be a type of game. For
Okay,
example,
so
in
is
like
that
the
Asian
novel,
Americans should move
for
back to
example,
where they feel
no, that is not what our argument is. Our argument never was the idea that Asian Americans are tied to their land, but rather that they have a relationship to it, or people who weren't even born in
Okay, so
Asia
how
but
do
are
they
Asian
fulfill
Americans
this
have some
relationship
sort of
with
cultural relationship to it. Our argument never is that we should permanently
Okay,
fulfill
so
those
here's
things.
my
Wait,
question.
so I'll answer. So for example, I don't know if you read the novel called Joy Luck Club, but in the Joy Luck Club, these people, play things like mahjong every weekend.
Okay,
That
so
would be an
that's
instance
not
of
my
a
question.
way of trying
Here's
to
my
reconcile with one's
Dude,
melancholy.
can I ask my question? Okay, so my question is, does that mean that Asian Americans, like why exactly do you need open borders in order for Asian Americans to sort of reconnect with their heritage?
It's not the concept of reconnecting with their heritage necessarily. It's not, again, our argument is not saying that people should be tied to their
Can you in one
land.
sentence say what the affirmative does through open borders to help Asian Americans?
No, I can't say that in one sentence.
Okay, what is this all specific to Asian Americans?
This is all specific to Asian Americans. What does it mean to be specific to Asian Americans?
Like your advocacy is specific to helping Asian Americans have this sort of melancholic politic.
I don't think we are making an argument that says that every Asian American experiences the same thing with one another.
Okay,
but
so
I
you're gonna
do
cause-
believe that
Okay, that's good, thanks. Does the Lester and Allred 07 evidence, it talks about how, for example, they want to, move away from white neighborhoods and things like that. How is this, specific to places like China where everyone there is, most people there are Asian and there are no sort of, white communities that Asian people are being kicked out of?
one, we're not talking about Asians. Again, we're talking about Asian Americans. Second, you're misrepresenting the Allred 07 evidence. It doesn't say that people don't want to
Okay.
live in white communities.
Have
It's the
situations
exact
gotten
opposite.
better
It says
for
that
Asian
it says the Allred evidence
Have
says that
conditions gotten
white
better for
people
Asian
move
Americans?
away from Asian neighborhoods because they don't
Okay,
want to
I
compete
have
against
30
Asians.
seconds. Have conditions gotten better for Asian Americans?
I don't think that's necessarily what the 1EC is arguing for. You can make some sort of argument that says material progress is possible, but we're
Is
making
material progress valuable?
we're making an ontological claim to say that things
Is
like the
material
mythology
progress
itself
valuable?
marks Asian life within that
Is
frame.
material progress valuable?
Again, it can be valuable, but that's not
Okay,
what the
sounds
stance
good.
that the 1EC has taken on. I
do
think
you
that the
defend
1EC
state
is a
politics?
prerequisite for any of those things to be possible.
Do you defend state politics?
No, we
Okay.
don't implement a hypothetical implementation of the resolution through the government.
I'll take a bit of prep, but I'll start on my timer now. Okay, stop prep at 40 seconds used for 20 sending the net.
Oh my
There will
god.
be 3 off in case. Okay, it's done. Let me know when everyone has it as good to go. I might not read all the cards on framing, so I'll just say if I say the card.
You said 3 case.
Yeah.
I'll let you know. Okay, I'm good.
Good?
Yeah.
Great. If everyone's good, then that's okay. Interpretation. The firm must only gain offense of the advocacy scheme of resolve. Just requires open borders human regulation. First, on definitions. Resolve is the affirmative must defend the implementation of the resolution to Part 1. Resolution serves as the basis of debate required and to do so. Resolution comes with the adoption of legislative bodies. And just means rights according to law. This Merriam Webster noted is option to rule rights according to law. And open borders means lack of immigration control. This paragraph 20. Open borders refers to the view that states do not have the legitimate right to control their borders, and they should not allow anyone who wants to enter the country to enter. And a border is a territorial distinction, not something to be broken down by melancholy. It's dictionary note date. Line that separates one country from another. And migration is defined by project archaeology as human migration is a movement of people with intention of settling. Violation of advocacy, open borders subtracted through melancholic policies. Even if they claim justice requires open borders, definitions don't align with the resolution standards. One of them had equity. Any alternative requisite is impossible to negate alternative frames to the ground allocated outside the parameters of the resolution. All one year defense of this claim will rely on concession and ground which isn't disabled the access for a year of debate. And they exploit predictable limits so you kill the next radical action shifts the ground for a debate and push to the far high predetermined premise structured around the plan and the resolution because anything else goes the way fairness intrinsic good debate is fundamentally negating the requires effective competition between the app and negative. But it's not way since asymmetric constraint beats intrinsic debate and see structural fairness issues turns inclusion offense. And they don't get to weigh the app. It's just like they're winning because they weren't able to effectively fair defeat it. And choose their side debate. We just stop on the neck for John use their offense. And it's not better since the critique on the neck has to be turned to the app. Otherwise, our discussion starts and ends with the one I see. There's a from a well-defined resolution to critical law, the neck to refute the app in an in-depth action. The process of negation produces iterative testing and improvement. Only a resolution of bound both sides allows so no controversial internally to education committee that way. We say discuss the best offer for status quo. Even some resolutions are better than that, better for the group to develop creative topic than the individual. And debates over mechanism of political trade skills that are interacting policy and strategic intricacy that promote intellectual rigor. That's used in 8. Action officials are directly influenced by external forces. The force of really right unless a concerted effort is made to embrace policy action. Analytical skills are needed to distinguish procedures from policy. Criminal justice students much search for errand remedies or past mistakes. So know criminal justice and embrace policy analysis. Better equipped to communicate with practitioners, officials, scholars regarding criminal justice. Studies is lacking fields of criminal justice, intentional policy analysis creates a void for practitioners. We're able to be improving crime policy. All that you need to be armed with skill, knowledge, and necessary for formulation, implementation, and evaluation of policy. TVA defend the opening of border side migration for Asian people. This allows them to criticize the exclusion of Asian people from migration policy. And read the econ decide as the option retrying the existing order. 5 paradigm issues. 5 like drop the debater's fundamental baseline for debatability. Use competing in terms 1 top guide is yes or no question can be reasonably topical. And 2 reasonability invites arbitrary judgment and right to embrace the bottom questionable argumentation. No arguments. First of 1 and C to go on the theory which kills self-interest education encourages the theory debating since the 1 and C will perfectly be seen into logical. You shouldn't wait for not being abusive. Next off. We advocate for the advocacy of the frame of yellow, Asianness as yellowness. First, the line of the app says Asians as yellow, as assuming Asianness with a phenotypic descriptor of yellow results in marginalization of racial of the non-East Asian Americans. This doesn't mean that you can't use the term Asian American. You use the flat name with the category of yellowness. 2 impacts. 1 is coalition, excluding non-East Asians hurt the capacity of organizing and communicate from all Asians. 2 is racial flattening differences results in non-East Asians feeling less than are excluded. Results in invisibilization, marginalization, causes psychological violence. Things 20. Asian American movement referred as yellow power. Filipino Americans protested they did not identify with the term yellow and identify by brown terminology. Set the tone for East Asian Americans to be centered as dominant in Asian Americans, Southeast Filipino Americans, South Asian Americans, Southeast Asian Americans, both sides feelings of marginalization, exclusion, being told they're not Asian enough, stereotyped as inferior, uncivilized, and being excluded altogether, resulting in marginalization and invisibility. And frames of action is the multiple advocacy means that any part of the 1AC can be the next spectrum by the 2 AR. We can reciprocally get to conditionally particular frames and narrow the debate to the parts of disagreement by the 2 and R. And next off. The only little bad in the face of capitalism produced knowledge that informs revolutionary tactics, relation to extinction and climate apartheid. This Escalante 19. The world we live in is dire state. Capitalist production created climate crisis, leaving on the brink of extinction. Governments returning facts leaders so as large as the most marginalized ever. Whole countries being destroyed and bids for more policy needed for a revolutionary movement has never been so clear. More people realize that capitalism and imperialism are the problem. We also unite to fight for the better world. How would we know what tactics to unite around? But masses don't want to defeat, they want to know how to fight back. What's at stake is question marks. The epistemology is possibility for revolution, mostly defend this possibility. And we explain anti-Asian racism better. Bio-Orientalism centers their history of racial capitalism. That's pertinent to Wally 21. Racialization of disease reflects the fear, biases, prejudice, propagation by anti-Asian discrimination, tied racial capitalism, extracting economic value from minority to produce circles. Pending migrant workers with free labor viewed as a threat to white working class duality of fear and prejudice. As yellow peril model, minority myth upholds Asian as an expert to achieve the American dream. Construction of yellow peril model, minority discourse and constructs divide between good Asians because their success under capitalism, bad subject considered worth threatening. Race, ethnicities, not biological determinism, but a social contract. Racism is a systematic issue striving for different opposition to power scripted in history. And Asian American oppression is mediated class and institution must be challenged through egalitarian political politics rather than individual conscious race successor to have a political potential. That's Pan 15. Evidence on individual behaviors offering little in the way of suggesting how to attack and confront racism. The idea that Asians' richer cultural values enable a attract their out hardship and circulation struggle for global ascendancy upon political solution and racial restrictions. They was eager to contain civil rights movement and found successful Asian immigrants dismiss the horror of interment and exclusion, discussing material advantages to transnational rather than result of policies, despite capitalism entry into the universities, utilizing capitalism as a meritocracy. Asians consistently make less than white counterparts, discounted expandable labor, fighting inequality, not simply challenging stereotypes, but attacking the economic system that requires racist hierarchies and constructive visions of labor. Simply refactoring perception would not be sufficient to struggle with institutions that politics of redistribution to attack the economic system that exploits and oppresses workers. And the 186 refusal of state politics provides subject to the rush of identity agents that allows for further subordination to dehumanize and destructive system in the long term. All these are terminal solvency evidence of the address of Wilmore 6. Social movement activity is no longer the political alternative within the market. There are no means or opportunities of constructing an autonomous identity that autonomous demands of opposition that the required tools and bases on the non-conventional political articulation can be offered. Identity construction, which is the characteristic and attractiveness of the theme park, demonstrate identity inside the theme park. The radical action allows for complicity within statical outside this area. Social movements have a system stabilizing effect that embraces autonomy and agency and the self vis-a-vis system. Non-conventional forms of political articulation constituting what economic system need for self-reproduction. And the alternative is a affirm a model of Communist Party. Only the party can provide effective accountability mechanisms, educate and mobilize marginalized communities and connect global structures to the movement of international liberalization. That's Escalante 18. Base building dual hierarchy party organizing solidifying power, revolutionary socialist tendency, revolution not currently possible. Institution can meet people to demonstrate what communists can offer, release from capitalism. It's also to meet people's need to have a public basis of Communist Party membership around dual party lines determined by democratic decision making, holding members accountable, unifying action, educating, empowering communities to theorize through a communist theory, organizing and fight for the liberation of formal structures allow individual, local, and also unified charity party organizing allows organized to be held accountable. We'll skip framing for now on case. The role of the ballot is to vote for the better beta. Anything is arbitrary, self-serving, best the question of the rest of the vote comes to presumption. Nothing spills over from the app. There's no connection with the ballot. Changing people's attitude. Encourage more people to reframe return to often depends the alteration of mindset. No more for the ballot competitive nature, but to be co-opt any ethical value of advocating without winning rounds only makes it seem like they want to win, which framework means advocating by losing is more effective. C, debate and other evidence of specific sets a high threshold for solvency, ignores how communicative overall operate. In order to say I want to fix X problem, you may say that X problem voting apps not access social change, but voting negatives will also procedural impacts of debate order 13. Debate orders any message and brand capable of creating social change. Academics that analyze debate non-applicable data fails to have unique access. Opponents have no interest in the assumption of merely fiction that's harmful. The position not people like humans into rational thinking. And present all psychoanalytic theories false based on their belief in authority. No evidence of error 21. Psychoanalysis has holding science concepts around clinical case interpretation. The authors do not have seen to improve major psychoanalysis have followed steps attributed to authority. Readers neither no way to verify nor resources to understand. Good for cross whenever you're ready.
Alright. Starting on the pick, what's the alternative?
Yeah, so the pick says that the alternative would just, we're advocating for just the app, except for your framingness of, the term yellowness, insofar as it precludes other sort of Asian American groups from being able to identify with what the affirmative is advocating for.
Wait, how we deny people to identify, whatever they are advocating for?
Well, yeah, so you're labeling this whole thing as, bio-Orientalism in the context of, yellowness, which, the natal 20 evidence is really good at talking about how, for example, Filipino Americans or Southeast Asian Americans or South Asian Americans don't identify.
So I do understand that the evidence says that Filipinos don't identify as yellow, but why does that mean that the 1AC is a bad idea? Or why does that mean that the 1AC is bad?
Yeah, so I would say that the rhetoric of the 1AC, insofar as you're sort of, framing Asian American identity in terms of yellowness means that certain groups feel like they're not able to actually
So
partake in this.
so just
you can look at the coalitions and erase your
so
parts.
just because we said an aspect of Asian Americanness can be seen as yellowness, we're bad, and we totalize Asian American identity as all yellow life.
Your
Is
like
that
very
what your
first
argument
line
is?
said only explicitly to cannibalize and exploit the yellow race. You're claiming the entire race is like phrased as yellow, and independently you don't
Okay,
talk
okay.
about
So
anything
so
else
you so
that
just to, so
can
just
include other groups.
so just to clarify, the link argument on this is saying that we think that all Asian Americans are yellow.
The rhetoric of the 1AC is harmful because it precludes all Asian
Just
American groups.
but yeah.
from
So yes or no. So does that mean that your link articulation on this is saying that you think that the 1AC is making an argument that all Asian Americans are yellow? Yes or no?
I'm not saying that you believe specifically
Or,
that all
but that's
Asian
what our
Americans are
1AC
yellow.
says. That's what our 1AC
Every
says.
single piece of your 1AC evidence specifically refers to
Come on,
these
in order for you
groups
to
as
generate
yellow
offense,
light.
it needs to be a yes or no. So just yes or no. I really need a yes or no.
You're saying that people are
Okay,
all
alright,
yellow
this
light.
is alright, the TVA, you say that defend open border for migration of Asian people. How does this have anything to do with the AF when it talks about Asian Americans, and that's what I said during cross-ex?
Sure, I mean, you can defend opening borders for migration of Asian American people as well, and then talk about how these sort of current migration policies exclude Asian Americans from being able to
Wait,
partake in
what? Like, what kind of policies discriminate Asian Americans from going to, like, where?
I would say that's like what the affirmative advocacy is talking about. It's talking
Oh,
about
so
how
that's what
there's
you
these
think it
sort
is. Alright, cool.
of- Your own evidence talks about how there's exclusionary laws that prevent Asian
It's fine.
Americans from being able to immigrate.
The critique, how do we scale up to a communist party?
Sure, so I would say that the problem in the status quo is that saying that, oh, we need to take these sort of realistic decisions or realistic actions takes away from the idea that the alternative needs like full investment in order to be able to like achieve the sort of international liberation that the critique is advocating for. Specifically, like we control the root cause for why exactly there's
So I
anti-Asian
understand that
American
you control
hate.
I understand that you control the root cause. My question is how does the alternative scale up? How do we mobilize the population to engage in a communist party?
Yeah, so that's what the alternative is saying. The alternative is saying that when we affirm a model of a communist party, not only does this sort of like spread out like of like party organizing and the importance of this, but rather not it's able to mobilize communities on sort of like the front lines to be able to fight against capitalism.
Prep started. Did you finish the Fiera 21 evidence?
No, I stopped it at to explicitly understand.
$151 use. Order is case, starting with a short overview, and then the line by line, the T framework, the pig, and then cap.
So overview on case proper framework.
Pig, cap.
Any
First
new
one.
cards without anything?
Yeah, there is one card. It's just a definition.
Is it email or something?
Yeah, it's on the chain. Alright. I think good.
Use the card, right?
Yeah, it's just a definition.
Okay.
Alright.
Though abgalonus is pathologically embodied by one or two sanctions doubly subjectivity as the obedient minority and melancholy politics helps us understand our subject position, which opens up the condition for subject formation by opening up the borders of affects in order for the human migrant to escape after status quo oppression. Notion of Asian American subjectivity now the line by line given no presumption because the one he sees not about the ballot but rather a question about the value of debate, which is that it allows high schoolers to deliberate upon political issue and figure out strategies that they can explore outside the debate space, which means that there's an extrinsic value to debate the written evidence. We don't link to it because we're not about social change, but it's rather about Asian Americans being able to reconcile with their identity. The psychoanalysis argument, they didn't even finish the argument, so you shouldn't value, but one, we're going for psychoanalysis of the philosophy, not as a clinic or a science, which means that we're able to understand social structures like things like the model minority myth, which isn't completely dependent on psychoanalysis, and two, it's like you need to answer the specific index of psychoanalysis, which is our angle. One, evidence says that it's completely distinct now onto T framework. One, coercion is that forcing racialized bodies to engage in the clinic and institution as the only way to solving your problem structures Asian American identity back under the obedient minority perpetuates violence because the system of violence is constantly maintained. Two, counter to Blue 17 and John 2K 12 substantiates and affirmation of the resolution that deters from hegemonic narratives by re-territorializing into alternative narratives of Asian American non-production, i.e. the way we define the resolution as resolved means true to its analysis, creativity, always accuracy is Q to KVK to be that based on dogmatism, and three, autopoietic. This had to be the self-adapting, but it reproduces itself regardless of what is done to it, but they weaponize fairness as a way to maintain the culture of KDB and as criminal marks Asian life too. The pathology perpetuates space of constant violence based on the notion of constant critical exclusion on competitive equity, refinement, and Houston group them all yell one yes ground. Their rich space surrounding racialization and resistance that competes cap psycho essentialism, all arguments that directly interact with the app, not consensually because people have read these on me, and so did you too. Yes, we can wait. You could have tested the app, but you didn't. Also, you can't respond to those arguments logically without evidence. And three, they explode limits whereby specking completely different countries means zero core Ds, mixed and negative and small school debating impossible chaos overlap in theory means 1K can respond to the linearness of chaos, and four, it's circuit fairness and circularly always sees the game is good because it's a game without a residual impact. Beyond winning means that you should only evaluate external offense, which sites make no warrants for how we can read it on the negative, and we definitely can't TVA one. It's an independent voting issue because you homogenize Asian American as assuming be tied to the line. I explicitly said during cross success not what we defended is exactly what causes the essentialized lines. It's true is that it's not able to solve for jack shit for Asian Americans because it's not able to discuss about the specific individual position or melancholy, and yes, arguments you should lose if you make the model debate something that is anti-Asian. Now, go to the pick. Starting on the pick, we have a massive weenie. During crosses, I asked you, is it yes or no, whether or not you think that we purely defend people in terms of yellowness, and you couldn't answer that. We will tell you here, we only defend people who are yellow, but we never made the argument that Asian American itself is completely defined through yellowness, but rather that an aspect of yellowness instead of itself as Asian Americanness. This is a bad argument. You should not evaluate it because there are different aspects and textures of Asian Americanness, which means that having an analytic of yellowness is good because in order for us to understand specific instances of violence, we must also have specific instances of grammar, which means that your ability to rob us of those grammar in and of itself is a reason as to why we'll never be able to solve for things. Turns all the coalition psychic violence argument. This means that this argument is not inherently exclusionary because we are not saying that other people are not able to participate in our politics. We're just talking about a specific analytic. That means that second, it justifies permutation due to the counterplan because other people are able to engage in it. And four is turn. This flattens out ideology because that means that we must use Asian Americanness without having to understand specific textures of Asian American violence, which just flattens out anything because artificial movement. And five is that you force me to speak for other people's experience, which I have no relationship to. Makes all that essentialized violence worse. Now go to the cap K1. No link to patents and app card. It says understanding subject position is negative to combat racism and proves the app is a prerequisite to the alternative. Independently, this card says that ethical consumerism is bad, which is not what the affirmative is. The second is the anti-Asian bias is rooted deeper than in capitalism. The Chinese Exclusion Act had an aspect of racial kappa, was the first and only anti-immigration law that banned an entire ethnicity, despite Germans and Irish also being ignorant. Proves that shit like Stop the Berkeley or Japanese internment camp and COVID run a deeper, more modern ontological difference that marks Asian life to the pathology, which only the app can solve. And three is turned to the app and the alternative. We don't refute the state, but the one is a prerequisite for Asian Americans to have the autonomy not to be subordinated and have the autonomy for true movement. And the alternative proper one, the alternative fails Marxist must t-shirts, and t-shirts become a symbol of ideological freedom, which reabsorbed into neoliberal Marxist scholars research on Google's not resistance but a compulsion into a constant reliance on capitalist technology. And two, scapegoat this at the all rallies of right-wing radical. Fourth of the Iowa caucus identified as socialist, but happened because 90% of the white demographic scapegoated immigrants for their bad economy turns the entirety of the alternative.
4 minutes, 20 seconds of prep. Everyone go to the flex prep? Cool.
Yeah, to a certain extent.
Wait, also, did you read the resolve card?
Yeah.
Okay. Top level responses on T was like forcing Asian Americans to like conform to, like, what else were the top level?
Wait, what?
Like, what were the responses on T at the beginning?
It was coercion dissent.
What?
The coercion dissent.
Coercion? Can you explain that?
Yeah, to a certain extent. The coercion dissent makes the argument that trying to have one strict definition of debating constantly pits Asian Americans within one stereotyped model
Okay,
of what
which were the other responses?
the autopoietic dissent.
Can you explain these, please?
It says that the utilization of things like theoretical arguments and fairness is a way to justify why certain K-debating or certain styles of debating in itself should not exist is inherently exclusionary and marks a K-debating in relationship to things like criminality instead.
Okay, and then what was the next response? Other dissents?
Those are the dissents I read.
Okay, 2 dissents.
Yeah.
No? Oh, yeah. Independent reasons draw the team.
Those the dissents I read.
Okay.
The dissents I read. The dissents I read, and
What
then
was the IVI and the TBA?
it was that you homogenize Asian Americans. That's just being marked purely in relationship to the land because you're just like make immigrants and Asians move into a certain country and solve all our problems. No, it doesn't. It doesn't solve for anything.
Reasons why fairness is bad, just fairness is circular.
What?
Reasons why fairness is bad is just that fairness is circular.
Well, we made like a lot of arguments as to why fairness is bad. That was like the things I told you in relationship to the dissent, but there was also fairness circular, yeah.
Okay. Did you respond to any of these specific definitions?
Counterinterprets all that.
What was the stuff about Psycho competing on ground?
You could read that on my app.
Okay, that's basically prep. The order is going to be T. Anybody not good to go? If nobody's not ready, then are you good?
Yeah.
We're way ahead on competitive equity. This should frame your evaluation of the round. Their interpretation explodes limits and makes it possible for the negative to gauge its internal link to fairness, which outweighs, which means that if I win, that fairness comes before everything else in the debate. That means that you should feel very comfortable negating. And they don't get away the app. It just means infinite abuse because the unpredictable form, the one I see, means that we couldn't engage to be able to test whether the app T preempts are true or not, and the affirmative needs to be theoretically legitimate first. This is a prior question to the substance debate. On these sort of like top level sort of dissad, actually I'll go for fairness first. Fairness first. One, fairness constituted process of debate since today is a game with winner and loser speech time, flipping 30 minutes before on constituted rules mean any dissent or interpretation are inevitable and terminally non-unique. Two, it's self-defeating. Although 1 AR arguments assume the judge will evaluate them fairly, which concedes that the actively hack against these documents. Absent of fair ability to gauge, you can't test alternative liberation strategies, and the interpretation assumes that the method is correct and towards a dogmatic and singular view of the world and deliberation. Every productive discussion of liberation strategy assumes an equal playing field of fairness with the ability to contribute to discussion, which only our interpretation resolve. And their interpretation assumes the affirmative is correct, but we can't do anything to do that if we couldn't engage in the first place. Which means that she necessarily comes to the prior question that I'm able to sort of like operate any of the sort of their like reasons why why their case like cross applies to team she means it's violent, and should reject any sort of claims that fairness is structurally inaccessible. One, fairness is in linear impact, which tries to minimize the instance of fairness regardless of social issues, and they can't solve the battle, they cannot remedy the sort of disparities out of round. In turn, debate educates about reforms, which is the only terminal impact. Learning to challenge the binary decay is necessary to combat the structural inequalities, which means that T is a prior question solving that, and if fairness is truly bad, you can just vote against the negative fairness doesn't matter. But independently, we're also winning this sort of clash. We'll get to competitive equity, but we're winning on this sort of clash dinner, which tells you that the best way for us to be able to actually engage the outside world to create real world change is being able to engage in the affirmative in the first place. That any risk that I'm losing ground or losing the ability to engage with the negative is the reason why you would lean towards the out. On the competitive equity stuff. Extend competitive equity, they don't accurately respond to talk about how these sort of like limits that the negative isn't able to prepare for means that there's no way for us to actually be able to contest it. We lose a lot of substantive ground. For example, any sort of things like normal disads, counterplans, picks, etc. that all rely on the fact that there's going to be open borders means that there's absolutely no way for them for us to be able to engage, and independently they didn't do any of these sort of work on the definition, so we'll get to that here. On definitions, to extend a few definitions, first of all, we're going for this open border means a lack of immigration control, which literally just means that states do not have the right to sort of limit what people enter the country or what people enter an area or not. And the dictionary notate definition tells you that it's a territorial distinction, not something that broken down by melancholy. You don't have to define any of the definitions that are most applicable in educational usage that we're able to be able to use in the debate, which means that they definitely violate the shell. There's no sort of like I, me, or things like that. And independently, we actually define migration when it comes to human migration being the movement of people with the intention of settling, whereas their sort of migration, like they weren't even able to give a clear answer across the image of what exactly sort of migration means. The counter-interpretation is absolutely BS. Like the counter-interpretation is literally just like, hey, look, guys, like open borders means that open borders is something about reducing by analysis, where they don't actually implicate and means that the counter-interpretation definitely still triggers all these sort of offense insofar as there's no reason why reducing by analysis means anything in the context of the one saying it still means that if they meet that like you can see that in this round, like I'm not able to engage with other forms of these sort of arguments. On the disads that they read. On the first coercion dissad about having strict definitions being bad for Asian people engaging in race space, this isn't true for a few reasons. First of all, you can turn it because this sort of like TOC actually incentivizes people to engage in definitions, not just assume that your definition is true. Rather, you're supposed to be able to engage your definitions with my definition, the border, and things like that, which actually makes a challenge sort of rhetoric in debate space more because I'm giving you an opportunity to engage, whereas you just read one singular definition, didn't even try to engage, which means that if anything, you're sort of like depending on these sort of strict definitions, and it's the reason why the dissad flows neg. And they say its utilization of fairness is like serving like white debaters. A point is that if me, a minority within the debate space, cannot accurately engage in your sort of argumentation to talk about why exactly is necessarily important for Asian Americans to be able to sort of like do things through implementation of open borders, means that you're not accessing any of this sort of offense, and it's even more violent and exclusionary in the debate space insofar as people are literally not able to engage with us. If you read it in other ways, such as reading it as like switch side debate, etc., means that you're able to better engage. And there's definitely tons of things in this hard sort of talk about how as to why open borders are necessarily going to be worse for Asian Americans as a whole. This doesn't make sense as to like why exactly you're not able to read that. And independently, even if you want to read something about Asian Americans, it's still necessarily better that you have to make sure that there's accessibility to engage in the debate space. Also this is you can classify all these reasons why fairness is not structurally inaccessible that I've read in the top, which also takes out the second side. There's no sort of like toppable framing issue that the affirmative has on this debate. On the independent voting issue on the TVA. They say it homogenizes Asian Americans, but no, you can specifically still specify, like, advocate for individual groups and how this sort of benefits individual groups, like you doing this affirmative, but it's just that you aren't able to sort of, like, redefine borders to be things like, oh, this is melancholy, this is things like that, which means that there's absolutely no sort of offense that we can generate. They say that fairness is circular, but this argument doesn't make sense because it's not like we're sort of, like, re-justifying fairness because it's making it fair, but independently, if you think that fairness is circular, that means that if the fairness doesn't matter, then you just hack against the affirmative in the first place. They say, you can contest the affirmative without this sort of evidence, but independently, they're not winning any sort of like violence that T actually creates in the context of this round. We're not saying that your sort of advocacy is violent and that you shouldn't be able to read it, but rather it has to be in a way for people to be able to engage in it. So The Houston 8 evidence is really good on this, which talks about these sort of like actions in the real world are better for debate mechanisms over political change, which breeds skills for interacting with the policies and actually being more clash with the round. Okay, here's how the round breaks down. Fairness definitely comes first. Insofar as fairness comes first, that means that the competitive equity is the strongest internal link to fairness because it dictates whether or not we're going to have equal ground to start out the debate, which is a lexical question to be able to engage in the debate space. This sort of clash argument controls the internal link for them to be able to even access their education. All the sort of framing issues on this can't be falsified insofar as they can't weigh the affirmative when we're contesting whether the affirmative is theoretically legit. And I've taken out these sort of definitions and turned it insofar as having this sort of tea debate is better for Asian Americans or like debaters in general to be able to sort of talk about the definitions and like utilization of certain styles.
What was this argument about fairness or linear impact?
Fairness as a linear impact means that we should strive to minimize as many instances of fairness regardless of structural skews. So even if we can't resolve literally everything, like having net more fairness is better for the debate space because more debaters can engage in these sort of discussions.
What's this argument about normal dissent?
So for example, I can't read something like populism or something like that because none of it would engage with the affirmative. The vast majority of ground that the negative reads is stuff that like just wouldn't apply because you would just use your definitions like borders being like these sort of like emotional things to circumvent that.
Alright. The order is case and then T. Alright, printing good?
Yep.
Good?
Yep.
Alright.
We win this debate because she has practically conceded the coercion dissent, extend the coercion dissent, forcing racialized bodies to engage in the clinic and institution as the only way to withdraw your problem, structures Asian American identity back under the position of the obedient minority, which exacerbates things like second class that should come before all other arguments because of the ethic layers of flow. They've conceded the argument as to why fairness should not come first before ethics, because the ethics in it itself is the only extrinsic value as to why debate should matter, because debate in and of itself allows us to deliberate as to how we're going to survive outside the debate space, which has to be a prior question, because fairness in itself is a circular logistics, which will be clear on their only response against the coercion dissent is saying that we're going to challenge definition, which is like their interpretation is good. Our counter-interpretation challenges definition. We have challenged a normative definition of why their interpretation is bad because it forces Asian American bodies to be able to force into a certain stereotypical way of debating, or courses back into us having to fight or defend things like the oppressor, which is just not good, which is why we must radically imagine how our politics itself is constantly conducted. Now, onto the fairness debate. We do not need to win an argument that says that we are more fair, just that we are fair enough, which is why debate is just supposed to be hard by nature. This answers a lot of their impacts of things like fairness and why fairness is a linear impact, because it doesn't matter because more fairness does not necessarily translate to more education or even better education. They say things like fairness controls the internal into education, but we have provided a reason as to why their educational model in and of itself is bad. Their constant addiction to things like fairness and fairness in and of itself is a reason as to why it perpetuates spaces like debate itself to stay violent, because it marks critical debaters as in relationship to things like criminality, which always causes a psychic split between the debate community and draws in our inability to ever have those discussions, because people constantly read tea theory. This debate collapses down to whose theoretical interpretation is better. You should seriously set your predisposition aside of what kind of normal model of debating should look like, which is why when the 200 comes up, make some sort of argument by saying that, well, I'm a minority, but I couldn't engage, and assumes a dogmatic notion of what debate should be like. We have two arguments as to why we are fair enough, or in fact more fair. One is that we definitely do provide things like grand caste cycle essentials, all arguments that she could have done to engage my position of the affirmative, and she did. She probably could have gone it for things like the CAPK or things like the pink, but she decided not to do those things, which is her fault for doing that. Her argument says that she's not able to read normal dissents. That should not matter insofar as we have one necessary reason as to why their educational model should not matter, but they did have access to ground. Second is that they explode limits more. This was straight conceded. Our argument is that things like their interpretation justifies infinite policy affirmatives with distinct political jurisdiction. Think about how many affirmatives have already been broken on this topic that are about different states. There's zero core negative dissents because they're all about different jurisdiction, but things like chaos, overlap in theory and content, which is like things like the CAPK are able to respond to a linealistic position, which is why it's not a question of infinite interpretation, but rather a question of how much content there is, but how much content there is. But their interpretation justifies a world where there's way more content than the world of our counter-interpretation. Our counter-interpretation is the best strategy because it allows us to break out of things like certain racial tensions or understanding of things like epistemological representation of Asian American subjectivity, which is why our interpretation comes first and it's generally the most debatable. They say things like predictability, but I answered that above, how it's not a question of it's not a question of interpretation, but a question of how many interpretation there is. They say things like definition, but rather a counter-interpretation is the only side that's able to control it. Their only response against us is just saying this is BS because we read a resolved definition, but no, it's a question of us being creative. The Houston evidence, competitive equity answers all of that, so we win the debate.
Good round.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.